Good evening. It is Friday, August 28th, 2020, and it is 6 p.m. in the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C. And you're tuned to the Critical Hour here on Radio Sputnik. I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. There is an awful lot for us to discuss today. One of the consistent issues that we will cover with most of our guests is the fact that the president formally accepted the Republican presidential nomination from the South lawn of the White House last night. He spoke for almost 70 minutes, a lot of platitudes and hyperbole, but very little substance. I'll make one observation. He opened with, quote, "We are one national family and we will always protect, love, and care for each other," end quote. No mention of, no acknowledgement of the American victims of police brutality and murder in this country. What are we to make of all of this? Well, it's Friday, so we're going to open the show the way we always do with our first guest. He's a frequent collaborator with all major news outlets and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, Caleb Maupin. Caleb, as always, welcome back.
Sure. Always a pleasure to be here.
Your thoughts on the 70-minute RNC convention speech from the president, as well as your overall thoughts of the convention?
Well, I will say that in some ways, Donald Trump was able to stage a more theatrical convention than the Democrats were. However, will that actually result in him winning more effectively at the polls? It doesn't seem to look that way. This convention was aimed at his base, at stirring up people that support him, at kind of having a rally. It was probably especially important because Donald Trump's ability to have the rallies that he is famous for, where he goes around the country and speaks to huge auditoriums, was kind of ruined by the pandemic. But I'm not sure this is actually going to help Donald Trump very significantly at the polls. What is interesting is that this convention violated the norms and legalities of U.S. presidential campaigns quite a bit. Let's remember that the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, spoke at the convention. That is not standard practice. Members of the U.S. State Department are required to not campaign for anybody, even in their private lives. Mike Pompeo began his speech by saying he was speaking as the father of his children and the husband of his wife. Well, everyone knows he was speaking as Secretary of State, and his 4-minute address focused almost exclusively on U.S. foreign policy decisions. Furthermore, the use of the White House, the use of a ceremony in which people received their citizenship, a naturalization ceremony, all of this was a huge violation of U.S. politics. Our tax dollars did not go to pay for Donald Trump's campaign. So using things like the White House, like naturalization ceremonies, like a pardoning ceremony, like a speech by the U.S. Secretary of State, all of that was in large violation of the norms of U.S. politics. But the reality is that, when you do this, the other side is going to do it. So I think we should expect pretty soon we'll be seeing Democrat-controlled institutions also being blatantly used in a partisan way. And that, they say when they go low, you go, when they go high, when they go low, we go high. But that's not generally how it works. If one side does it, the other side does it. And this is certainly an escalation of political conflict in the United States. The fact that there were protesters outside the convention who proceeded to harass Rand Paul and some other people as they were coming out. This is all an escalation. I mean, there is big differences between the political elites in the United States. The economic crisis has intensified that. The issue of police brutality has intensified that. The continued unrest has intensified that. The rise of Russia and China around the world as a geopolitical pole of opposition is also intensifying that. And I think we're going to see more and more intense division at this point. Now, Joe Biden does indicate that he will debate Donald Trump. There was some talk that Joe Biden might not even be willing to debate Donald Trump. That's how intense the divisions have become. But it appears that there will be debates. So the election is going to proceed. We had the conventions a month late, and the voting is coming up in November.
Well, Caleb, a couple of things. Number one, I personally believe that the Democrats' attempt to evade debating Trump is because of they're afraid it'll expose Biden's cognitive decline. That's my thought. So, but let me throw a couple things at you. The similarity in the two parties' conventions to me was both appealed to emotion, the same exact emotion, fear. That guy's going to destroy everything. We'll make things better. They used imagery, they used symbolism, no policy foundations whatsoever. However, here's what I see as the difference. Trump focused on his base. He appealed to his base, and he went for that old, political, adage. You got to do three things to win: turn out your base, turn out your base, and turn out your base. While the Democrats did the same types of things, but interestingly enough, they appealed to people who have not been their base at all. They appealed to Republicans. They ignored a significant portion of their base and said, we're going to create a new base by going after Republicans. So they used the same tactics, but one went after their base and one went after the other guy's base, right? I have to say, if I had to bet who wins on that, I'm probably going to bet on the party, since they're both using crappy techniques. I'd probably bet on the party that actually went over on their own base. What are your thoughts, Caleb?
Well, as far as the tone of the conventions, it's very interesting because as somebody who has more of a left-wing, anti-imperialist, socialist perspective, I would say that in terms of content, I agreed more with the Democratic convention. But in terms of just tone and emotions, I agreed more with the Republican convention, right? The Republican convention was playing up this idea that there's a group of elites who have abandoned America's working families. The people are angry about how things are. It's time that we had a strong government that stepped in and fought for average people. I agree with all of that. It's just the content I don't agree with. I don't agree with what they want to do about it, which is completely deregulate everything, increase hostility toward immigrants, increase hostility toward Muslim Americans and people with different religious views, back up and completely support police brutality and trample on the protesters exercising their democratic rights. I don't agree with the content of the Republican convention, but the tone, the emotional tone of it, was far more in line with what a progressive and a leftist would genuinely believe, whereas the Democratic convention was a defense of the status quo. And yes, it was appealing to fear. It was Donald Trump is responsible for instability in the country, and he's making people distrust our mainstream media, and he is causing people, to see the United States as a force that is retreating around the world. It was very much, the Democratic convention was an appeal to the establishment. Donald Trump is ruining things for the establishment, whereas the Republican convention was very much a call for revolt against the establishment. Well, I'm not for the establishment. I just don't agree with their solutions about how to oppose the establishment. So it leaves people like me that may have been more excited about a Bernie Sanders or a Tulsi Gabbard. It leaves us basically out of the political process. Do you want a right-wing uprising against the establishment that'll make things worse, or do you want the establishment? Well, neither, honestly.
They both spoke to what to vote against, not what to vote for. Neither of them told me how they're going to make my life and the life of my family and those that I love any better. And the adage has always been, you tend to vote for things, not against things. Caleb, you mentioned that the Republicans violated the norms and convention, the established conventions. We were told by Steve Bannon early in the first campaign that the focus of the Trump administration would be to deconstruct the administrative state. That has stuck in my mind, and I say this all the time. Garland probably gets tired of hearing me say it, but they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do: deconstruct the administrative state. And I don't hear anybody from the Democratic side of the conversation focusing on that and showing us examples of how it is they're doing it. Am I making, and I'll throw this to you and to Garland, am I making more out of that statement than there actually is?
I think that there's some truth in that. And like I said, it is a right-wing uprising against the establishment. I will say that, after I watched Joe Biden's speech at the close of the Democratic convention for a second time, I had eerie reminiscences of that speech that Jimmy Carter gave, the crisis of confidence speech, the speech that kind of destroyed Jimmy Carter's presidency, right? The very dull, they called it the malaise speech. And there's an oddly similar tone. There's this kind of dark pessimism. Things are not getting better. These are hard times, but I'm a nice old man and I'm going to take care of you. And we're going to make sure that everyone does things and everyone plays responsibly. Don't worry. Don't get too excited. Don't get too fired up. We're going to take care of everybody. That seemed to be very much the tone of the Democratic convention, and most especially Joe Biden closing remarks. And at the same time, the Republican convention seems to be very much fired up with that, that we're going to go out and work hard and achieve the American dream, and no one's going to hold us down. We got knocked down. We get picked up again. No one's going to hold us back. It was very much a more of an appeal to that American enthusiasm, that American entrepreneurialism, whereas the Democratic side seems to be stuck in this kind of like, we're going to just calm down and make sure everything's okay. Don't get too excited. And I worry that, a lot of Americans really identify the American dream with that go get 'em, work hard spirit that it seems like the Democratic Party in many instances just can't harness. Now, Bill Clinton was able to harness some of that ethos we saw with his little place called Hope and all of that. And Obama did a little bit as well with his Hope and Change. But it seems like that kind of pessimistic managerial tone that things are going to get worse. Yes, these are hard times, but don't worry, we're going to try to be friendly and nice and take care of everybody. That tone doesn't work. I mean, Americans just don't want to hear that all across the country, all across the political spectrum. And that's something that I think anyone who is a supporter of Joe Biden should be deeply concerned about.
Yeah. And Dr. Wilmer, I think that people actually have different expectations of what they're going to hear from a Republican candidate and a Democratic candidate, because, traditionally the Democrats have argued, we're the smarty pants people. We've got all the, the blue collar people, the intellectuals, the academics and stuff like that. So I think commensurate with their traditional the position that they've taken, people expect that from them. They expect, okay, here's some policies. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to fix things. Here's how we're going to make things better. And this. They really expect some depth to it. Whereas the Republicans traditionally are, we love America, and if you disagree, you hate America. And people expect that from the Republicans. So I think people's expectations are different, and people kind of heard what they expected from the Republicans. Rah, rah, those people are scary, and we're tough because we're Americans.
Yeah, but Garland, what I'm really speaking to is the violations of the Hatch Act. I'm stuck on deconstructing the administrative state. What that says to me is you're going to violate the Constitution, you're going to violate mores and norms, and you're going to do whatever the heck it is you want to do, and establishment be damned.
I always bring foreign policy and domestic policy together. If you look at the U.S.'s foreign policy, which Joe Biden absolutely and the Democrats absolutely support, it's that. It is who cares with the norms, who cares about the law, who cares about international law, will overthrow countries, will steal the oil in Syria, will whatever. I think because our foreign policy is such a reckless, Viking abandon any law and order foreign policy, that both parties are in a position now where can they try to pretend that they're going to stick to the laws domestically? They're going to try to hold one party or the other to the law. To me, it's just there's no honor amongst thieves, and their foreign policy reveals that. So they don't have much to say about domestic policy.
Okay. Well, on behalf of Vikings, because some of my best friends were Vikings, I don't think they'd consider themselves to be reckless, but we'll discuss that another day.
Yeah, well, but they did get a lot of holding penalties on first down.
17-year-old charged with homicide after shooting during Kenosha protests. On Wednesday, they arrested Kyle Rittenhouse, charged him with homicide after 2 people were killed and another wounded. Let me throw this out to you, Caleb, that the unrest that we're seeing play out in the streets of American cities is a reaction to police violence, not the cause of it. People in Kenosha, Portland, and other cities, they come into the streets in response to. It's not that the people come into the streets and then the cops respond. And the president said last night, We will defend America against all threats and protect America against all dangers. Well, as I say often, the adage is don't start nothing, won't be nothing. And that's foreign and domestic. Caleb, your thoughts?
Well, the fact that so many conservatives have kind of made Kyle Rittenhouse almost into an admirable figure somehow. Like they have described him as, stepping up when the law enforcement failed. Tucker Carlson has made some very disturbing remarks. I mean, that is just horrifying. Civilized people don't see political rallies with which they disagree with and just show up and shoot people there. That is just not anything that any civilized person would justify. You can disagree with the police brutality protest if you want, but the idea that a private citizen, a minor no less, can then attack them with violence. I mean, this young man had committed a political act of terrorism. No question about it, right? I mean, if a Muslim went to a rally supporting Israel and shot a bunch of people, that would be called terrorism. If somebody from any other political grouping got together and just said, "Oh, there's a group of people somewhere having a rally that I disagree with, I'm going to go shoot them," that's called terrorism. But for some reason, the right wing has kind of made this young guy into some kind of an icon, and that is deeply, deeply disturbing. Because the implication seems to be that there will be much more behavior of a similar manner. And we know that around the country there have been a lot more folks who disagree with political rallies showing up with firearms and such. And, maybe they're just practicing their open carry rights in open carry states. But this is very, very, very dangerous. And it's wildly disturbing. Let me add that when it comes to the issue of police brutality, they really don't seem to know what to do. I feel like there are people in the Trump campaign, there are people in the Republican Party, there are people in the Democratic Party calling up police departments across the country and saying, just control your guys, okay? Can you not kill anybody this week? We're in a lockdown. The economy is really bad. Can we just cool it for a moment? Can we just calm down so we can have some social peace? But they can't do it because it's beyond their control. When you have a population whose living standards have vastly decreased, when you give police departments around the country all kinds of military equipment, when you send police to get trained in Israel and learn not how to deal with civilian populations, but instead how to deal with people who are being occupied, as the Israeli police train them to do. When you create an atmosphere in police departments that's almost a trigger-happy atmosphere, you can't just turn it off, right? And that, yes, these individual cops that have taken these horrendous actions need to be prosecuted and held responsible for their actions. We have to recognize that there's a systemic problem here, that policing and policing agencies in the United States are out of control, and it's leading to greater instability across the country. I wonder if this whole call to defund the police on some level is about a question of strategy. Do we want local police to continue patrolling our streets, or do we want federal officers that are more tightly controlled to do it? And I almost wonder if there's a division, because local cops tend to be more Trump supporting, tend to be more conservative and right wing, tend to have patterns of discriminatory behavior that are much more blatant than federal officers. And I wonder if that there is a faction within the U.S. government that is saying, because we need social control, because we need to manage this country, because we need to prevent further riots and unrest, we need to assert more federal control over our policing agencies and have a centralized approach to policing in the United States. We can't have every little town and every little city doing things their own way. And I feel like there may be a big difference when it comes to this. I feel like there may be a desire on the parts of some figures within the Democratic Party and within the higher ranks of the U.S. government and quote unquote deep state about having a more national, federally directed approach to local policing. And I think that may be underlying some of these calls to defund local police departments.
Caleb Maupin, as always, thank you so much for your time. And Garland, I said yesterday and the day before that I was wondering if they would make Kyle Rittenhouse out to be a Dylan Roof. And that really seems to be, in many regards, that's the direction that they're trying to construct this narrative, that he's a lone wolf, he's a figure that we should really be sympathetic towards as opposed to being disgusted by.
It's funny that it's interesting that he came from out of town and shot people, but he's not an outside agitator. But if other people come to protest from out of town and just carry a sign, they're outside agitators.
Indeed.
Caleb, as always, thanks. Folks, You're listening to The Critical Hour here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, Dr. Wilmer Leon, joined by my co-host, Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.